Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tabula Rasa. We're an online teaching platform who aim to provide holistic education to the students across economic classes and geographical barriers. We find it imperative that they engage in discussions on topics outside their syllabus to develop rational thinking individuals. To that end, we have organized a webinar, which is the second of our lecture series. Today, we have with us Mr. Prabal Banerjee, Assistant Professor of the Department of History at Malda College and a PhD research scholar at Hyderabad University. Mr. Banerjee was previously associated with the 1947 Partition Archive as an oral history apprentice. Today, he will speak on feminizing medicine, women, and health in colonial Bengal. As we know, because of the subject position of women in a country like ours, where they are doubly marginalized, they are often subjected to a sort of second class citizen. This is also seen when it comes to their health and treatment. A report during the ongoing pandemic states how lesser number of women were admitted to the hospital compared to men. Mr. Banerjee will enlighten us with his research as to why this is the case and trace it back to the annals of history. Now, I would like to welcome Mr. Prabal Banerjee. Thank you, sir, for gracing us with your presence.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Team Tabula Rasa for the invitation. This afternoon, I would like to talk about healthcare of women in colonial Bengal. Okay, am I audible properly?
Yes, sir, you are
Okay,
audible.
okay, okay. Thank you. The topic is very relevant in today's scenario, given that we all are passing through an unfortunate moment where newspapers every day reflect the status of declining healthcare system throughout the country. Faced with the crisis, the government is proposing reforms in the existing health infrastructure. Let's talk about the fact what is the position of women in the present healthcare system? What was the position of women healthcare in colonial Bengal? Were there any healthcare awareness among women in historical past during the 19th century? Can this historical background hint us where and why did our healthcare system actually fail? We'll try to answer these questions in this presentation. Now I'm beginning with my presentation. Okay. So, a recent newspaper report, this is the report, sorry, this is the report actually. This was the report from 29 June 2020. We suggested that though the death rate is higher among women than men in Bengal, which was 3.82% among women, while it was 3.65% among men in June, rate of sample testing is much lower among women. Out of 83,656 samples collected between 15th May and 31st May 2020, women's samples consists only 13,323. That is about 15.92%. Sriparna Ghosh Mukhopadhyay, a senior program manager of an NGO working in the sphere of social welfare, informs that there is a tendency in rural and urban areas to place less importance on women's health. And another doctor, Dr. Kunal Mojumdar, professor of community medicine at KPC Medical College, Kolkata, women do not go to the doctor until their situation worsens. But if we look back at colonial Bengal, we see that there were lots of discussions about women's health at that time. Now, what was the condition of women in 19th century Bengal if we consider their health issues? If we examine the situation in the first half of the 19th century, it will be seen that during this time, women were mainly confined to the inner sphere, which was known as Antopur in vernacular Bengali, of the household. They could not taste the beauty of free light and air. They remained within the joint family under the strict supervision of other older women of the family. Bengali society in the first half of the 19th century was caste ridden, traditional, which tied its women within a family structure which is patriarchal and regressive. Now, what was the condition of the health of women folk in Bengal? If we question this thing, we will find that the custom of Padda was the primary constraint which was responsible for the ill health of the women, since during this time women were denied free light and air. Male doctors were denied access inside Antapur, the term which I have already used before. Thus, many women died without any proper medical attention. Catherine Mayo, an American feminist journalist who have visited India in the year 1927, she wrote a book called Mother India. And in that book, she portrayed a picture of an Indian girl in the following manner. I quote Catherine Mayo. She was writing, take a girl child 12 years old, a pitiful physical specimen in bone and blood, illiterate, ignorant, without any sort of training in habits of health. Force motherhood upon her at the earliest possible moment. Right. So this was the condition of the women during the 19th century. So now women of the caste Hindu households used to take care of the well-known cultural figure of Bengal and a Nobel laureate. Sharada Devi died because of herbal treatment. She had a painful wound in her hand. Contemporary contemporary physicians and surgeons had treated her. Possibly they had applied the system of grafting. But Sharada Devi herself believes in a woman traditional healer who used to give her herbal medicines. Her one of the daughter-in-law, Prafullomoy Devi, once told, I quote Prafullomoy Devi, when the wound was healing up, tamarind paste was applied around the wound on the advice of a traditional women healer, and then the wound again became poisonous and matured again, which caused her death due to gradual contamination. But however, as the century progressed, there were some improvements in the situation. Now, what were those changes? And the long 19th century, the students of history always term that 19th century as the period of Bengal Renaissance. Means it was the age of rebirth, right? So 19th century saw the emergence of a new middle class. Now one might think that what is the historical background behind the emergence of this class? The conquest of British rule in India gave birth to a bureaucracy which was all pervasive, overpaid, remarkably insufficient, and largely indifferent to the well-being of the people for whose governance it had, after all, been created. In order to fulfill the needs of this all-pervasive bureaucracy, British rule sought to create a new class which should remain loyal to the British on one hand and fulfill the necessities of the colonial bureaucracy on the other by serving as clerks, junior administrators, etc. Britishers were also aimed to give birth to a new class of intermediaries out of this middle class. This group became educated in modern Western education, imbibed the modern Western spirits of rationalism, nationalism, and democracy. It was the members of this group who had raised women's question. It was they who first attempted to reform the position of women in the Bengali society. Women came out of Padda around this time, which I have already told earlier in the initial phases of my presentation that Padda was the main constraint to for the healthcare. The women were not getting proper healthcare because of this system, because male doctors were denied access to their domain, to the women domains, which was also known as Zanana, right? So it was these members of the middle class who first attempted to reform the position of women in the society. Women came out of Padda around this time. This new group gave birth to a new domestic ideology where they imported the Victorian notion of womanhood and reformulated domestic relationships. New domestic ideology of 19th century visualized a woman who must be a true companion to her husband, a good mother who must produce a good, brave son to fight for the nationalist cause. From this time, there were several schemes which were undertaken to educate women. Before this time, there was a peculiar notion existed in society that education for women is a curse. William Adam, in his report on the state of education in Bengal, told that, I quote William Adam, a superstitious feeling is alleged to exist in the majority of Hindu families, principally cherished by the women and not discouraged by the men, that a girl taught to read and write will soon after marriage become a widow. It was only with the beginning of the age of enlightenment in Bengal there was a change in the condition of women. Now, however, impetus for education for women in India and Bengal in general came from the missionaries. The time was ripe for the issue. There was the Charter Act of 1813, which granted 1 lakh rupees for the purpose of education in India and encouraged the migration of missionaries. Britishers attacked the Indian society for its degenerate and barbaric social customs of the Indian people. Thus, colonialism also saw itself as performing a civilizing mission. They attacked the conservative practices of our society that penetrated on women. Colonial masters assumed the position of sympathy with the unfree and oppressed womenfolk of India and transformed them into a sign of the inherently oppressive and unfree nature of the entire cultural tradition of the country. The first school for girls in Bengal was opened in Chinsura in 1818 under the initiative of Robert May of the London Missionary Society. Among the British, the contribution of William Ward was also most significant. He, for the first time, appealed to missionaries to make arrangements for the education of the girls. Another lady who is significant in this respect was Hannah Marshman. Under her initiative, Baptist Society established a girls' school. After that, British and Foreign School Society took an initiative and Miss Cook Abarot arrived in India by ship. That time, School Society started a school for girls in Calcutta. One of the most important steps on the part of the government on this issue was the establishment of a female school, which was known as Hindu Balika Vidyalaya by J.E. Drinkwater Bethune, who was a legal member of the Governor General's Council and the President of the Council of Education. That is our Bethune College, situated in near Bidhan Saroni. The students of this school came from respectable Hindu families, and the curriculum of the school was secular. It did not impart any kind of religious instruction. Many members of the Bhadralok class also became concerned with the education of women. Rammohn Roy first turns attention of the society to the degraded condition of women. Rammohn criticizes the contemporary patriarchal society by stating that status of women has been reduced to slaves. Rammohn also attacked the contemporary belief that women's minds were too inferior. Another member of the Bhadralok class, Satyendranath Tagore, the first ICS and elder brother of Rabindranath Tagore, and the first Indian ICS officer also, wrote in his memoir. The name of the memoir is Amar Ballokatha o Amar Bombay Probas, where he was writing that, I quote him, from my childhood days, I support the cause of freedom of women. My mother used to scold me, often telling that, what you will do with freedom of women? Will you take them to Maidan like those Mem Sahibs along with you? But though faced with lots of criticism, middle class reformers initiated a movement for emancipation of women. Malavika Karlekar, a noted feminist historian, attempted to provide a brief overview of reform movements that attacked prevalent social practices like child marriage, polygamy, widow immolation, or sati. Reform movements spearheaded by Brahmo Samaj of Rammohn Roy, Young Bengal under Henry Louis Vivian Derozio, all were critical of contemporary social practices. It was Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar who championed the cause of female education and fought for the women's rights. He wrote vividly on this issue, frequently cited from the ancient scriptures to support his arguments for maintaining social equilibrium. He founded 35 schools for girls in Bengal, and he fought for long with the government to get those schools registered. The group of Young Bengal, under the leadership of Henry Louis Vivian Derozio, also supported this noble cause through their journals, The Ganan Nation and The Bengal Spectator. Though these early efforts by Ishwarchandra Vidyasagar and this group of reformers are worth mentioning, perhaps the most important initiatives were taken by Keshav Chandra Sen and his Brahmo Samaj. This group was mainly focused on education of women. Thus, it is evident from the above discussion that an urge to reform the condition of women was in the air during this time, and that impetus of reform came from among the group of newly emerging middle class intelligentsia, the Bhadraloks. It was this reform movement which gave birth to a concept of Bhadra Mohila. Okay, the female member of the Bhadralok family. The term Bhadra Mohila was first coined by a noted feminist historian. Her name was Meredith Borthwick. She published a book that named "The Changing Role of Bengal," a changing role of women in colonial Bengal. It was published in 1984. So these Bhadramahila by Bhadramahila Meredith Borthwick argued that these Bhadramahilas were the female member of the reformed Bhadralok household, and she differentiates these Bhadramahilas with the previous Bengali women who remained for whom Parda was the main constraints, right? Though there were many such initiatives on the part of the reformers on the issue, number of women coming out of their women to receive education is still very low. But it is evident from the contemporary reports that some improvement has been achieved in this sphere. From the report of from the report on the progress of education in Bengal 1902 to 1906, it is evident that 70,000 to 215 girls were there in primary schools, and the number of primary schools were also increased by 1,788 by the end of 1907. But the number of upper primary schools for girls was much less, only 209, and the percentage of girls attending these upper primary schools was only 14.4%, which is still very low, not adequate. The report also mentions that on 31st March, there were seven high schools for girls in the province of Bengal, among which three schools of the metropolis deserve special mention. These are the Bethune Collegiate School, the Brahmo Girls School, and the schools for girls in Bakipur. So after receiving this kind of education, an emerging feminine consciousness can easily be evinced from the writings of women during this time. Several women writers like Rashundari Dashi, who was the first woman autobiographer from colonial Bengal, Krishna Bhavini Devi, Sarala Devi Chaudhurani. Sarala Devi Chaudhurani was also a member of the Jorashako Tagore family, and she was quite vibrant in political sphere, and she noted special mention, I must say. So all these women wrote about themselves. A reformed female subjectivity has also been formed through the publications of many periodicals of women around this time. We can trace emergence of many women's periodicals like Bamamadhini Potrika, Antopur, Bharat Mohila, Mohila, Bongo Mohila, etc. One such woman, Amala Devi, wrote an article in Bamamadhini Potrika The name of the article was Stri Shikha or Stri Shadhinata. It was published in August 1917, where she wrote that these days educated menfolk of our country are fighting for the cause of women's education and freedom of women. There are differences of opinion between them over the issue. Actually, I forgot to mention that there was two group of opinion regarding the education of women. One group, which was led by Keshav Chandra Sen, believe that for women science subjects is not at all required. They need not no, they need not study these kind of subjects like mathematics, philosophy, etc., etc. They should only focused on how household education means, proper homely education actually. But other group led by Darokanath Gangopadhyay, Durga Mohan Bosu, etc., this group focused on scientific education of the girls. So this Amala Devi was writing about this issue, that she was writing that there are differences of opinion between them over the issue, and Amala Devi is asking in this article what is the significance of education and freedom, as she believes that many people are thinking that education of women only leads to their economic independence, through which women will gain freedom, and this freedom will lead to arbitrariness. But as Amala Devi thinks, education is something more than a means of securing employment and earning degrees. Thus, she believes education is important for both boys and girls. And there were many other women who wrote in the contemporary periodicals. Now, I'm going to healthcare of women. And what are the impetus to reform women's health in colonial Bengal? I have already mentioned in the initial phase of my presentation that the missionaries played an integral role in the education of women in Bengal. In the sphere of health also, it was the missionaries who played the pivotal role. Missionaries for the first time criticized the custom of Padda. Belle J. Allen, and she was also a missionary, and she wrote her document in 1919, and she attacked Zanana in India in the following way. I quote Allen: women are inherently bent upon evil and evil only, and that continually Hindus, all but the lower class, seclude their women rigorously. The apartments used for this darkened and muffled existence are known as the zanana. So she describes zanana as a as a place as sunless and airless. And missionaries always believed that Indian women were trapped in the zanana, which was sunless and airless. And it was they who will reform these zananas. Evangelical mission in India began in India in the year 1793 with the arrival of William Carey in Calcutta, and medical mission started in the year 1850. As far as the health of women is concerned, women missionaries played an important role, but the ground was not ripe for them. These women missionaries faced immense difficulties when they went to treat women in the Zanana, for many native households were not ready to accept women missionaries inside the spiritual domain of Zanana. I will come to this term spiritual domain in the latter part of my presentation. So these women missionaries who arrived in India in the middle of the 19th century were horrified by the conditions of Zanana and by the unspeakable tragedies of the Indian women. Margaret Balfour and Ruth Young, they were also women doctors who were practicing in the decade of 1920s, most probably between the year 1925 and 1930, wrote that, I quote them, they saw their Zanana people dying in childbirth without any advice other than the dirty and ignorant old die. They saw the precious babies untreated because their mothers could not take them to a male doctor. Right? So these missionaries also had faced many difficulties since there was no hospitals. She had to make, I quote Margaret Balfour and Ruth Young, she had to make best of some Indian house and perhaps live there herself while devoting all her spare time and energy to raise money for building. Added to these factors were the tradition and superstitions of the Indian society, which had always relegated its women to the zanana, which was the darkest and dirtiest part of the establishment. The earliest initiatives to bring women within the field of medicine in colonial Bengal are evident in the activities of Mesmeric Hospital, which was also known as Jadu Hospital in the colloquial Bengali term. This hospital was established by Dr. James Esdaile, who was the son of a Scottish clergyman who arrived in India in the mid 19th century and was appointed as civil surgeon in Hooghly and also served as principal of the Hooghly College from 1839 to 1847. However, Israel lost patronage for mesmerism and left India in 1851. But this mode of treatment was present in India even after Israel left, and mesmerism did exert some influence. As the century progressed, many Bhadraloks were also become attracted to mesmerism and preferred this method of treatment for their women since mesmerism could be performed within Antapur. By this time also, during this time, after missionaries started their exercises to reform healthcare of women, Bhadraloks were still averse to the male doctor, to the idea of calling male doctor for their women folk. And for this reason, they accepted this process of mesmerism because this could be performed within the sphere of Antarpur only. Sarala Devi Chaudhurani, the name of whom I have already mentioned, she was niece of Rabindranath Tagore and an important figure as far as contemporary women's movement is concerned, wrote in her autobiography about her experiences of mesmeric treatment. She writes, I quote her, one morning I felt a very bad pain in the neck and I was unable to move. My father gave a call to Mr. Olcott, who was a good mesmerizer. Mr. Olcott mesmerized me and I relieved of that pain. From that time, family members became attracted to mesmerism. Sorola also mentions a woman mesmerizer too who used to treat in their family. I quote, she was writing, there were many women who were good mesmerizer. One of them was Sushila Boutan, mother of Dinu. Boutan means elder sister-in-law in Bengali. In the initial phase, all missionary women who had worked in the Zanana and treat Indian women were not qualified medical practitioners. Foremost among them is Miss Hewlett, who had arrived in India in 1877, started a dye training school in Amritsar, and have trained many Indian women to serve as assistants in missionary hospitals. First qualified woman doctor has arrived in India in 1870. Her name was Dr. Clara Swain. I mentioned his name in the presentation. Everybody can see. Clara Swain, who was attached to the Women's Foreign Missionary Society of the Methodist Episcopal Church. Dr. Swain has arrived in Bareilly in Uttar Pradesh and opened a dispensary there. And she got help from Nawab of Rampur, who helped her by donating the land of dispensary and hospital in Bareilly. She was in charge of dispensary and hospital at Bareilly till 1885. After that, she was approached by Raja of Khetri to become physician for the ladies of his estate. She left India in 1895. Another woman, Miss Sarah C. Seward, came to Allahabad, who was sent by the American Presbyterian Foreign Missionary Society in 1871. The first qualified woman doctor from England was Miss Fanny Butler. See, I mentioned the name of Fanny Butler, who was sent by the Church of England Zanana Missionary Society in 1880. And she was settled herself at Jabbalpur in Madhya Pradesh, residing, and then at Bhagalpur in Bihar. However, her work was remarkable in Kashmir, where she initiated some pioneering work in the field of women's health. Some missionary women came to Bengal also. Dr. Mary F. Seeley arrived in Calcutta in 1872. These lady doctors from outside India came to the subcontinent with a specific purpose. They wanted to treat Indian women who remained confined within sunless, airless zanana. Now, and all these initiatives were from the missionaries. British Raj also concerned with the healthcare of women, and Queen Victoria herself established the Countess of Dufferin's Fund. And this fund was created in 1885 to provide medical relief to the women of India who were remained confined in the Zanana. See, I mentioned the name of Dufferin Fund, and in the foundation of this Dufferin Fund, Dr. Elizabeth Bailey played a pioneering role, who was also a medical missionary. Bailey came to India. See, the name of Elizabeth Bailey is here. Bailey came to India in 1875 and settled herself in Lucknow. During her tenure at Lucknow in 1881, she has been asked by Maharaja Punna, her native state in Bundelkhand, to attend his wife who was suffering from a serious illness. After she removed, means Maharani Apunna removed from her illness, when Bilbi was leaving the estate of Maharaja, Maharani told Miss Bilbi, I quote the words of Maharani, I want you to tell the Queen and the Prince and the Princess of Wales and the men and women of England what the women of India suffered when they were sick. So for this thing, Dufferin Fund came to existence, and the main aim of the Dufferin Fund was to provide medical relief to all Indian women and arranging medical tuition for women of the subcontinent and all other works instrumental for this work. Now I'm going to next slide. Yeah. Now, what were the and this was the I was concerned with the work of missionaries and the British Raj regarding the healthcare of women in colonial India and colonial Bengal. Now, what was the role of Bhadraloks in women's healthcare? I've already argued that from the late 19th century, this a new middle class intelligentsia emerged in colonial Bengal, and after they had emerged, they have developed a new nationalist discourse whereby they have divided their nation into two domains. One is material, which is outer, and spiritual, that is inner. I have already argued about the spiritual domain in the somewhere in the earliest part of my presentation. Now, what was the material and what was the spiritual? This material domain is the outer sphere, means, and this Bhadralok argued that we need to imitate the British in the material sphere, but we need not to imitate the British in the spiritual domain, that is inner domain, which is traditional domain, and we are superior in this domain, right? And this group became convinced that they need not to imitate the colonial masters in spiritual inner sphere, right? And from this time, family emerged as a new site, a site through which a moral restructuring of this imagined nation, they have imagined a nation within them, imagined nation, a moral restructuring of this imagined nation must be take place. Bhadralok developed a new genre of literature, the advice manuals, which was published in the contemporary periodicals. I have already argued about contemporary periodicals. Now, upon reading these literatures, one can trace that there was a tendency to reformulate the health practices of women along Western lines. However, the writers were not discouraging traditional practices. It was a new medical, I believe, it was actually my argument, it was a new medical discourse combining both indigenous and Western systems. There are many writings which stressed on cleanliness and maintenance of hygiene. Now, I will give example of some tracts, these advice manuals. In অপরিষ্কৃত বাটি ও স্বাস্থ্য, in English, Health and Dirty Home, published in a journal named Shastho, the writer claimed that unhygienic places leads to growth of diseases like plague and cholera. Another periodical, Mohila, published an essay on cleanliness in the medium of dialogue between Sorola and her grandfather, where grandfather is educating Sorola in the basic concepts of cleanliness so that she can preserve her health in a good manner. The domain of childbirth was also came under attack in this new discourse. Both colonial observers and this group of newly emergent Bhadralok tried to replace traditional dhais, but the process of this replacement was different. While colonial masters initiated several training programs for traditional dhais in Calcutta Medical College earlier and later at Eden Hospital, Bhadralok tried to educate Bhadra Mohilas with the basic aspects of scientific process of childbirth through these advice manuals. And what we saw, there was an attempt to reconfigure this domain without discouraging traditional practices altogether. ডক্টর যদুনাথ মুখোপাধ্যায় ইন হিজ ধাত্রী শিক্ষা এবং প্রসূতি শিক্ষা অর্থাৎ কথোপকথন ছলে ধাই এবং প্রসূতি দিগের প্রতি উপদেশ, which I translated in English as midwifery and education for pregnant women, advices for midwives and pregnant women in the form of dialogue, which was published in 1871. See, I wrote the name of this, Dhatri Shikha or Prasuti Shikha. It was published in 1871, argued that traditional Dhais needs to have some training on practical midwifery because they were practicing without any previous training. Here, an educated Dai, Lakshmi, was giving instruction to Binodini, whose sister Mohini is pregnant. In the preface of the book, Dr. Mukhopadhyay urged all traditional midwives to read this book since the work is written in their own vernacular, or they can ask others to read the book for them. Along with this, the book will also benefit educated Hindu females who will no longer place themselves in the hands of ignorant women in one of the most critical periods of their life. I quote Jadunath Mukhopadhyay. In another tract, which was written by Dr. Jyotirmoy Bandyopadhyay, see the name of this tract is also here, Shishur Janmer Purbe Dhatrir Kortobbo. He discussed about the importance of maintaining basic hygiene of the traditional dhais, since lack of general hygiene leads to many ailments in pregnant women and newborn babies. Thus, he writes, every midwife should wear clean clothes, bath daily, brush her teeth, trim her nails, and wash her hands thoroughly with disinfectants like Lysol before attending any delivery case. Dr. Bandyopadhyay also urged to keep the traditional lying in room, which was known as Shutika Griho in Bengali, clean. The room where the mother, and I quote Dr. Bandyopadhyay, all these things were written in Bengali. I translated all these things. The room where the mother and child will stay should be kept as clean and tidy as possible. Do not keep too much furniture in the room. Make sure that the sun and wind enters the room. Every midwife should keep in mind that the unhygienic practices are the root cause of maternal mortality. Sundari Mohan Das, another practicing doctor in colonial Bengal, also asked to properly regulate the traditional dhais to prevent infant mortality. He wrote these things in this Ayurved or Dhatrividya. See, the name is here. Thus observed that of all the babies born in Calcutta every year, about 3,000 or half die within a month of birth. This is because maternal health is not taken into consideration during pregnancy. Thus, he writes, proper midwifery training program is required to regulate ignorant dies. Sundari Mohandas also wrote a book named Briddhadatri Rojnamcha, Daily Life of an Old Midwife, where he differentiates between traditional ignorant dhai and an educated midwife. There are instances where we see that many doctors were reputed gynecologists who were practicing in villages of Bengal. One of them was Dr. Lolit Chandra Rai, who passed from Campbell Medical School and started practicing in Ulpul village in Faridpur district in presently Bangladesh during 1890s, and he was a renowned gynecologist. This newly emergent intelligentsia not only attempted to reform the domain of midwifery, they were also concerned with the health of women in general. An anonymous writer stressed on proper education of the girls, and he refutes the idea that education is detrimental to health of girls. He argued that this idea is baseless, and he proposed a change in the educational curriculum. We can trace several advertisements in the contemporary periodicals which show that the Dadan society was concerned with the health care of women. I would like to focus only on these two advertisements. One is the advertisements, see, called advertisements about medicine called Prosutarishto, concerned with diseases associated with childbirth of women. See, this is the advertisement of Prosutarishto. And another is Sudosundari Botika, concerned with women's health in general. And all these were the products of some Ayurvedic pharmacist shop. One is by Srijukta Nagendranath Sen Kobiraj. He was also he also opened a shop of Ayurvedic medicine. And another is the product of Binod Dal Sen. The name of his shop was Adi Ayurved Aushodhalaya. All these advertisements were there. There were several other advertisements in different periodicals, but I focused only on these two advertisements because of the constraint of time. And not only these Bhadraloks were concerned with the women's health, many women also concerned about their also become concerned about their own health. Though the Council of Calcutta Medical College objected the idea of female medical education in Bengal in the initial phase, it was Sir Richard Thompson, the then Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, who allowed women to enter Calcutta Medical College in 1883. The earliest beneficiary of this system was Dr. Kadumbini Ganguly. She was a dedicated lady doctor, and Florence Nightingale also praised Kadumbini in her letter to Lord Lansdowne. I quote the words of Florence Nightingale. She was writing to Lord Lansdowne in 20th February 1888 that Nightingale was writing that, do you remember asking me the name of this lady who is the cousin of two friends of mine, Mr. and Mrs. Monmohan Ghosh, who have successfully resisted infant marriage, etc. of Calcutta? Do you know or could you tell me anything about this lady, Mrs. Ganguly? That time Kadumbini was married to Dwarkanath Ganguly. Earlier, Kadumbini was Kadumbini Bose. Or give me any advice. Mrs. Monmohan Ghosh, who has all an Englishwoman's cultivation and absence of prejudice with a Hindu's affectionateness, asked me to recommend Mrs. Ganguly if she is successful to Lady Dufferin for any post about the female wards in Calcutta. The Hindu young lady's name is Mrs. Kadumbini Ganguly, still studying in the Medical College of Calcutta. She has already passed what is called the first licentiate of medicine and surgery examination and is to go up for the final examination in March next. This young lady, Mrs. Ganguly, married after she had made up her mind to become a doctor and has had one, if not two children since. But she was only absent 13 days for a lying in and did not miss, I believe, a single lecture. So, Florence Nightingale praised Kadumbini Ganguly in this way. Another lady, Mrs. V. Mukherjee, expressed her desire to study medicine. Mrs. V. Mukherjee was a Bengali Christian, and she wrote a letter to the principal of the medical college, argued where she argued about her desire to pursue medical education. As she wrote, I found this letter from the West Bengal State Archives, Kolkata, where she wrote, I quote Mrs. V. Mukherjee, Sir, I beg to submit my application for permission to be enrolled as a student of the medical college, and in doing so, I regret to have stated that I have not passed the entrance examination of the Calcutta University or any other examination officially recognized by that university as equivalent to the entrance examination. In that, during this time, entrance examination was the main eligibility criteria to enter Calcutta Medical College, but she stated in her letter that she has not passed the entrance examination. But in the latter part of the letter, I found that the principal of the medical college, admitted her to pursue medicine course in the Calcutta Medical College. Not only another lady doctor were there, Homyabati Sen, who was passed from Campbell Medical School. See, I mentioned the name of Campbell Medical School, which was opened its door for female students in 1888. And there, not only these women, there were many other ordinary women, I mean to say, who were untrained, never studied in any medical school, also showed their concern about women's health. One of them is Srimati Sneholata Sengupta. See, I mentioned the name of Mrs. Sneholata Sengupta, who wrote in a essay, মনের সহিত শরীরের সম্বন্ধ, wrote that health is wealth. It is the responsibility of all human beings to preserve their wealth. And she prescribes many things to how to preserve the health of the women. Another woman, and all these writings were published in the periodicals. And these, I found these two writings from a periodical named Ayurvigyan. Another woman, Srimati Shobana Ghosh, also wrote about the necessity of preservation of good health. And in her essay, she pointed out that health of the Indians are deteriorating day by day, and the main reason for this is that they are becoming irreligious day by day. Along with this, poverty is also there, and she also prescribes some remedies, where she wrote that main ingredients for good health are fresh air and clean water, labor for good work, good food on regular basis, physical exercise in good air, taking bath every day, drinking fresh water. These are the key to preserve good health, and one can live a long life. Another woman, Sophia Khatun, Begum Sophia Khatun, see her name is here, Begum Sophia Khatun, also wrote about the preservation of health of women. She writes, along with their inner learning, physical education is also an important aspect. Girls naturally have higher levels of nervous excitement than boys, but that can be adjusted a lot by physical excellence. The lack of regular and proper daily exercise can make girls useless, their face color faded, bad smell comes from their mouth. So, throughout her essay, she pleads for physical development of her sisters, though she is saying that education is also important, but a course on physical education is also important to develop their minds and preservation of their health. Begum Rokeya Sakhawat Hossain, a remarkable woman of the colonial Bengal, she died in 1932, I guess. I remember, I failed to remember the exact date actually. And she wrote numerous articles in many periodicals of Bengal, like Bongio Musalman Sahitya Patrika, Nobonur, etc., etc. She wrote up an essay called Nari Shikha o Muslim Samaj, where she criticized the dowry system, and she urges to the people of the society to spend money on the education of their daughters rather than saving money for dowry. She also blamed women for they themselves are not ready to inhale fresh air. As she writes, I quote her, to preserve our health, we need to do physical exercise regularly and we recover fresh air. Fresh air is one of the precious gifts of Allah, but I don't know why the gentlewomen are so reluctant to inhale that fresh air. She also writes in the same article that numerous girls of our schools failed in history, geography, and other subjects related to health. The main reason behind this is that they are not aware of the world beyond their own home and school. They don't know whether they have any other relatives except their fathers and brothers. They just see that their mothers and aunts always remain exposed to diseases because of living inside a closed room. Thus, throughout this discussion, it can easily be inferred that healthcare consciousness for women was an area of concern in colonial India. But at the beginning of my presentation, I showed that in the present corona situation, less attention is being paid to health of girls. What could be the main reason for this? There is a gender disparity in access to healthcare resources. I must take the argument of Amartya Sen, who thinks that weaker bargaining power within the household could be a reason. Furthermore, it has been found that Indian women frequently underreport illnesses, and we can say that in our home, in our home sphere, in the household sphere also, we regularly experience this kind of things. When our mothers become ill, they never wanted to go to doctor immediately. Right. So we always face this kind of experience. The underreporting of illness may be contributed to these cultural norms and gender expectations within the household. And gender also dramatically influences the use of antenatal care and utilization of immunizations. A study by Jean Yong Choi in 2006 found that boys are more likely to receive immunizations than girls in colonial Bengal, than girls in rural areas. Sorry. This finding has led researchers to believe that sex of a child leads to a different levels of healthcare being administered in rural areas. Of all health, another problem, what is the another problem there? Another problem is that of all health workers in the country, nearly two-thirds are men. This especially affects rural areas where it is found that out of all doctors, only 6% are women. This translates into approximately zero point 0.5 female allopathic physicians per 10,000 individuals in rural areas. According to Government of India National Family Health Survey, which was conducted in 1998-1999, the maternal mortality in rural areas is approximately 132% the number of maternal mortality in urban areas. In 2005, India enacted the National Rural Health Mission. Some of its primary goals were to reduce infant mortality and also the maternal mortality ratio. Additionally, in Rural Health Mission aimed to create universal access to public health services and also balance the gender ratio. However, a 2011 research study conducted by Nair and Panda found that although India was able to improve some measures of maternal health since the enactment of the NHRM in 2005, the country was still far behind most emerging economies. Current observers also finds that there are lack of access to the means of healthcare. Maternal mortality is still a big problem in contemporary India. Jacob Creswell, head of innovation and grants at the Stop TB Partnership in Geneva, Switzerland, feels that there are deeper societal and cultural biases as far as the health issues of women are concerned. The concept of missing women was earlier proposed by Nobel Prize winning economist Amartya Sen when he reported that in developing countries like India and China, the ratio of women to men getting healthcare is alarmingly low. Shane attributed this imbalance to inequality and neglect that leads to higher female mortality. Thus, I conclude we need to address these issues if we want to save the lives of our women folk. If we can think in a new way about these issues which we have learned from history, we will find a new direction of light in this regard. Thank you, everybody.
Uh, Thank you so much, sir, for such an engaging discussion. I would like to address a few questions which have come
Sure,
up
sure.
while you were speaking. So I will read it out to them.
Okay.
When you expound on the Victorian notion of womanhood, what specific things are you talking about?
Okay. See, a particular historical background was responsible for the emergence of Bhadraloks in colonial Bengal. So when they were importing and they were imitating, actually means they were imitating the colonial masters. They were imitating their colonial masters. As I have already mentioned, they were imbibing the colonial notions of nationalism, rationalism, democracy, etc., etc. So and British Raj actually criticized this Bengali society for their position of women. And now these educated intelligentsia, when they were developing, when they were imagining a nation for themselves, they try to what should I say? They try to reform their nation, and they try to reform their position of women, the position of their women actually. So thus they created these Victorian notions of domesticity, where a woman must be a good companion to her husband, and she must be a good daughter, and her sole aim was to produce a son for who will serve a nationalist cause. And they were not expected that women, they were not expected some kind of economic independence for their women, but that woman.
The binary that the
Exactly.
binary that we had of the fallen angel and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
fallen woman and the angel in the
Exactly,
house.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. So this is the Victorian womanhood actually.
Okay. The second question that we have is: was the Reformation limited to theory alone? Did the infrastructure healthcare system for women actually improve on the ground, raising concern among women? Was it only restricted to theory, or was there any change in actual
Yeah,
infrastructure as
yeah,
well?
yeah. See, some kind of we always know that key what we know from the theory, the practice is different from that theory, right? So here also I found that there was definitely a change in the healthcare system with the coming of Reformation and Renaissance, etc., etc. But the sole aim was limited. The sole thing was limited to only two particular group of women, this upper caste and upper class women, because working women, because one historian, her name is Manisha Lal, who argued that the Dufferin Fund, I have spoken about the Dufferin Fund, the main aim of the Dufferin Fund was to reach upper caste, upper class women, and they continuously uh, where they actually they think that ki parda was the main constant for womanhood, but actually the thing was not like that. There was many other difficulties which women was facing during this time. There was a need for proper sanitation, there was need for proper economic advantages, etc., etc. But I must say that definitely there was some kind of changes took place due to this kind of reformation or renaissance. But these kind of things focus particularly on these on a particular group actually. So yeah.
Okay. The third question is: since our discussion involves a discourse on class distinction in healthcare, do you think the 19th century Renaissance had helped women irrespective of class?
No, actually, see, Renaissance, Reformation, all these things was concerned. See, Bhadraloks were initiating their reforms. So obviously, it is evident that Bhadralok was only concerned with the class, with the women of their own class. My expertise was also on only on Bhadra Mahilas and this class of women. So I never research on this thing. Means what was the condition of women from the lower class and or something like that. What was the condition of the working class? I can suggest a book. There is a book by Dagmar Angels, Beyond Purda, Women in Colonial Bengal, and Dagmar Angels has worked on these working class women and all.
Okay. Uh, what are the social, cultural, and infrastructural reforms required to reduce the gender disparities in access to health resources?
Please repeat the question.
What are the social, cultural, and infrastructural reforms required to reduce the gender disparities in access to health resources?
Okay, we need to our mindset. I can say that only these things, and it is the it I and I must urge all the women to come to the forefront to change all these things. Actually, it is in the hands of women themselves. It is the women who can change these things, right? So
Okay, so the last question is actually my question to you.
mm,
In your research, so while concluding, you said that it seems like the report that we have now that fewer women were admitted compared to the research that you were talking about in colonial Bengal. That in colonial Bengal, the issue of women's health care was addressed, that you concluded. But I somehow feel that it is only the half truth, because in your research, the citations that you have given, they are mostly from the women who have written about healthcare or have
exactly.
addressed these issues. They are from either caste Hindu families, or like you mentioned, Begum Rokeya.
Yeah,
Even
yeah,
she comes from an economically higher class.
exactly,
So I
exactly.
don't think it is just a matter of class. There is also a caste question here, and it
Yeah, yeah,
cannot.
obviously. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
so it cannot be seen just
Caste
as
and class are
a gender.
intermingling with each other in this case.
Exactly. So we cannot see it only as a gender disparity, that women, there are further distinctions amongst it. So,
Exactly.
so what do you propose? Or obviously, we cannot, through just one discussion, we cannot have a concrete solution
Mm.
to everything. But what do you propose we can do to bring in women from lower castes, so called, so that they can avail better infrastructure and healthcare? Because when we see, even during this lockdown, we have seen that more number of migrant workers
Exactly.
have died, and people who had money, they had the means to go to a hospital irrespective of gender, men or women.
Mm.
But it is the lower caste and lower class who get affected
Who
more.
are
So
mainly
do you
suffering.
really think it is gender, or it also has to do with caste?
Yeah, obviously, caste and class are intermingling with each other in colonial period also, and in post. Actually, caste and class is the main problem in India. I think class is always is an universal problem. I think that class is an universal problem, but caste is peculiar to India, right?
Right.
And I think that we should visualize some good means of education. We need to educate the women from the lower caste and lower class background, and it is we can who can do these things. Proper means of education only can change the this scenario, recent scenario.
Okay, along with
And
more
must be there
government
some
contribution.
governmental initiatives must be
Yes, and
there
not
because
privatization.
privatization, exactly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Banerjee. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
this
Thanks a lot,
wonderful
everybody.
discussion. I hope all our viewers could learn, take something home from this discussion today, and we would love to hear you again.
Thank you. Okay.